as second nature. It's just the way we think. It's the era or the epoch of humanity that we're in, where scientific reasoning is just the default way of reasoning. Now let me make a couple of comments. So I've said a number of things about what the article's saying. Let me make a couple of comments as a sociologist about the article itself. First off, let me zoom in for a second. Look at that cover. Okay, so classic Time magazine red border, right? But it is not classic to have a completely black cover published by Time magazine with red letters. Notice this, is God dead? So the blackness supposedly kind of conveying a void or an absent, in this case the death of God, and the redness, let's not forget the symbolism there, which is the color, right, supposedly of atheist communists, right? So there's this kind of tension here saying that maybe there's this kind of maybe that's what is in the future for American politics, or maybe that's what's caused the death of God for at least part of the world. Note that most of the article is about Christianity, so that's kind of interesting, right? Still at this time in the 1960s, most writers in the United States are still focusing on that as kind of the main religious American tradition, even though there's evidence all around them of other religious traditions in America, but still kind of this Christian central focus. Note that in the article when the author talks about science, the problems are portrayed as inevitable. So when Copernicus noted that the world was not the center, that the sun wasn't said, the author gives this feeling of inevitability that people will now all of a sudden have to throw out their faith. And then two other things to note. There are big name people in this article. I counted at least 5 people who after this article basically kind of became the big who's who of religion in the world in the United States. Abraham Heschel, who's probably one of the most famous American rabbi. John Courtney Murray, who I mentioned before, who's a Roman Catholic priest. A couple of other Roman Catholic priests that were important at the time. And a guy named Martin Marty, who's still alive today and probably one of the foremost historians of religion that the United States has ever produced. So these are all people who are important to the American discourse about religion, writing, or at least being quoted in this article that's kind of problematizing and saying, well, is religion dying? And then finally, and this is how I'll transition to talking about what sociologists say about secularization, note that it's a bit confusing. It's really kind of confusing to get one coherent message about secularization out of this article. And that's because secularization theory has everything to do with the concepts you have about what causes it and what it is, it being secularization or the non-religiousness of society. Secularization theory also has a lot to do with how you view history. And then finally, how you measure the concepts of secularization so that you can argue one way or another about whether religion has disappeared from society, and if so, how we would even know that that happens. So, not surprisingly, secularization, and as I mentioned this before, was implicit in a lot of sociologists that you and I are familiar with. So Durkheim, who you all have grown to know and love, he was concerned. He said, you know, in this modern era, we have a change in the division of labor. That's a big term for Durkheim. Where it used to be, you know, if we were in a tribe, here's our tribe, we were all kind of equal, we all had the same position, we all did the same thing. Our rituals were those collective effervescent events we've learned about that make us all kind of think alike. And we think alike because we are alike. We all do the same things. We all live in the same place. We have the same work. But Durkheim, writing in the early 20th century, is looking around and saying, wow, modern society is really crazy because now modern society, people are scattered. Think of a teeming urban city where people don't connect. People do all sorts of different trades. People belong to all sorts of different types of groups. And what Durkheim was saying was he thinks that this society leads to what he calls the cult of the individual. And his big worry then with this is, if that is the belief system, if you will, if that is the symbol or the idea or the collective representation that's at the core of modern society, how the heck can individualism hold a social group together? And all of this for him is by way of saying then that the old religions that are based on kind of a different setup of society are just gonna kind of peter away. They're gonna die out. He has this great line where he says, "The old gods are dying, and the new ones are waiting to be born." So for Durkheim, there was going to be this overturning of these old forms of religion that we all know so well: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and instead we're going to be replaced, importantly for Durkheim, by a meaning system, but that meaning system would be this kind of cult of the individual. So goodbye religion. And then Weber, who we read about, who you've also come to know and love, right? He has this great metaphor where he calls the iron cage of rationality in the modern world, which is basically the world after 1850 for him. Man, I'm a horrible artist. You can see why I'm a sociologist instead. That's the iron cage, by the way. We get to the place where our actions are separated from our values, and we just do things because that's the way you're supposed to do things. That's how you get through the modern world of thinking and planning, and you work in bureaucracies, and you live in very kind of metronomic lives of just kind of routine. And that iron cage of rationality disenchants the world. That's Weber's term. It's a real depressive term. So the world has lost its ineffable spirit of creativity. It's all gone. And for Weber, he sees what's this mean is basically all organizations, including religions, will go this way, and it'll be spiritless. Weber always held out hope for a charismatic figure to come along and kind of re-inspire us all and reawaken religions. But in general, he had this very pessimistic view of what was going to happen in religion. And then we also have Peter Berger, who you've read, and I can note for a second with Peter Berger. His view of what was happening was that, and if you remember his argument, that religion is this kind of sacred canopy, right? And we we're in the middle here, and there's kind of chaos out here, but we've constructed really good at this, at constructing a nomos, and it's a nomos that makes sense of the cosmos, right? What happens though if you're, let's take an Irish Catholic in New York, 1870, some Protestants move in with their own sacred canopy. And then maybe across the way there's a Jewish neighborhood that has their own sacred canopy. Well, after a while, you start to realize that, hey, wait a second, I see these other sacred canopies. And ooh, maybe this person over here, I'm interested in dating this person. And maybe this person I go to school with. And so what happens is these sacred canopies start to bump into each other, right? They start to kind of crack. In a pluralistic religious world, we become aware that there's other choices out there, and that there's other ways of thinking about the world and making meaning, making sense of the world, and that therefore those canopies will kind of crash into meaning systems. So our sociology weighing in here, and these sociologists, by the way, are all writing up through the 1960s saying, goodbye religion, more or less. And which is really not kind of an optimistic view, clearly, but also, as we'll read on Thursday, we could question what some of these are saying. But let me kind of summarize these theories a little bit more and give you kind of key ways of thinking about secularization theory, some key concepts. I'll try and bring all this together for you. Okay, so secularization depends on a couple of key concepts. The first is modernity. This is this idea that we have entered really with the Industrial Revolution or the early 1800s, which is really the spark or the spurring of sociology. We've entered a different time in humanity that's characterized by different types of economy, different types of social relation, and different ideas. And the assumption was, in terms of secularization theory, that there was a material basis, and that as our material world, i.e. our economy and our social relations changed, that this would inevitably help to kind of wipe away religion, okay? That basically this kind of